My name is Emily. One evening, my father told me, calmly, in his living room, that everything he owned would go to my brother because he'd have a family someday. 3 days later, I learned that decision wasn't even legally his to make. If something similar happened to you, share it in the comments. I was reviewing a compliance checklist when the phone on my desk started vibrating against a stack of folders. Another internal deadline reminder blinked on my screen. Then my father's name came up, cutting through the routine. "Emily, come home tonight," Robert said. "There's something we need to settle." He didn't wait for an answer. The call ended. The checklist stayed open. An automated banner slid across my email. Quarterly attestations due by Friday. That evening, the house in the suburbs looked exactly as it always had. The lights were on. My brother was already seated at the dining table, a pen resting near his hand. Robert stood instead of sitting, one palm on the chair back, like he was about to start a meeting. "This won't take long," he said. "I've made a decision about the estate." He turned a folder so it faced us. A copy of a will sat on top, clipped neatly. "Everything goes to your brother," Robert continued. "He'll have a family. You won't need it." The words landed without ceremony. No preamble, no pause. My brother glanced at me, then back at the paper. "I'll make sure you're okay," he said, "if you ever need anything." Robert nodded, satisfied, and pushed the folder closer. "I've already handled this," he added. "It's been taken care of for a while." I picked up the top page and scanned the header. The law office name wasn't one I recognized. My grandfather had used the same firm for decades. This wasn't it. "Where's the trust he set up?" I asked. "The one he talked about before he passed." Robert's jaw tightened. "That's not relevant," he said. "This is simpler." My brother had already signed. The pen clicked back into place. Robert slid another page toward me, this one labeled as a waiver. "You have 72 hours, he said. "Sign this, and we're done." The room stayed functional, almost administrative. Chairs scraped lightly as someone shifted. Papers stayed aligned. No one raised their voice. My phone buzzed again. A work notification popped up before I could silence it. "Action required. Signature pending." The timing was perfect in the worst way. Robert noticed the screen light up and gave a small nod, like the system agreed with him. "Deadlines matter," he said. The folder remained open between us. My brother didn't look up. Robert waited, arms folded now, confident enough to let the clock start ticking. I set the papers back on the table, stood, and reached for my coat. No one tried to stop me. The front door closed behind me while, inside, the pen moved again, and my phone kept vibrating in my hand. On the driveway, Robert's voice followed through the open door. "Think about it," he said. "This is the reasonable option." The next morning, my phone started ringing before I reached my desk. Aunts, cousins, numbers I hadn't saved. Each call followed the same rhythm. "Your father did what he thought was fair. Don't turn this into something ugly. Family comes first, Emily." At work, the sudden time-off request I submitted the night before sat flagged in the system. My manager stopped by my desk instead of messaging. "You okay?" she asked. "You've been distracted this week." The word stayed with me longer than it should have. Distracted sounded clinical, like a checkbox someone could mark without context. I nodded, said it was a family issue, promised it wouldn't affect deliverables. She smiled politely and walked away with that look people use when they already made a note. Robert didn't wait for silence to spread. By noon, his version had reached everyone. Calls slowed, replaced by messages repeating the same phrasing almost word for word. "Your dad already took care of you. He's just trying to keep things organized. You know your brother has more responsibility now." My brother leaned into it. Photos of him and his wife-to-be showed up on social media with captions about the future. Robert commented beneath each one, proud and supportive. Nothing mentioned me. That omission felt intentional. A text from my aunt came through while I was deleting unread emails. "Sign the paper. Don't make him regret trying to help." By the afternoon, the pressure turned procedural. Robert's assistant emailed a follow-up, attaching the waiver again, this time with highlighted sections. The subject line read, "Friendly reminder." The tone suggested cooperation was assumed. Marcus Hill suggested lunch near the courthouse. The place had laminated menus and a steady line of people who looked like they were there on business, not leisure. Marcus didn't order right away. He set the folder I brought on the table and skimmed it without commentary. "Who drafted this?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Robert said it was handled." Marcus nodded once, flipped to the header, then took out his phone. His fingers moved quickly, practiced. "This firm isn't registered with the state," he said, "at least not under that name." He slid the phone across the table so I could see the empty search result. "If everything were clean," Marcus continued, "no one would need you to sign anything on a deadline." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Back at my apartment, the public records site loaded slowly, each page buffering longer than the last. I typed the law office name exactly as it appeared on the will copy. The screen refreshed, then displayed a simple message in bold text. "No record found. Please refine your search." The phrasing felt almost polite, like the system was apologizing for my confusion. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my brother. "Dad's upset," he said when I answered. "He doesn't understand why you're making this difficult." "I haven't signed anything," I said. "That's what he means," my brother replied. "We're just trying to move forward." The call ended before I could respond. By evening, a courier knocked on my door and handed over a certified envelope. The return address was the same office name that didn't exist online. The receipt required a signature. The irony wasn't subtle. Inside was a formal notice restating the 72-hour deadline. The language shifted from friendly to firm, mentioning next steps the family would take if the waiver wasn't returned in time. I spread the papers across the table, aligning edges without thinking. Another email arrived from work, this one automated. "Pending documentation requires action." 2 systems, different stakes, same wording. A cousin texted again. "Dad's just protecting everyone. Don't be selfish." The word echoed longer than the rest. Selfish implied intent, not omission. It suggested motive, where there was only a refusal to comply. Marcus called later that night. "Don't argue with them," he said. "Just keep copies of everything." I thanked him and hung up. The files came out in layers. Old emails buried under newsletters, receipts folded into envelopes, appointment cards from doctor's offices I hadn't thought about in years. Everything related to my grandfather ended up spread across the dining table, sorted by date, then resorted when patterns didn't line up. One email stopped me. It was sent to Marcus Hill years before my grandfather died. The subject line was short and practical. The body was even shorter. "Please make sure the trust is finalized for Emily. She's been handling my medical and finances. I don't want this revisited later." No drama, no emotion, just instructions. The timestamp sat there, undeniable. Long before Robert said he'd handled everything. A call came through before I could forward it. "Emily," Robert said, "you're dragging this out." "I'm looking at documents," I replied. "Things don't line up." "They don't need to," he said. "That's why lawyers exist." The word landed heavier than the rest. "If you don't sign," Robert continued, "I'll let my attorney deal with it." The line went dead again, just like before. Back to the papers. A hospital bill caught my attention, the date circled in red ink by someone else's hand. The admission date matched the signature date on Robert's will copy. Same day, same hospital. My grandfather had been admitted under observation, listed as not competent to make financial decisions without clearance. That wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Robert's comment from the first night replayed itself without sound. "I've already handled this." Handling meant avoiding. It meant moving around something already set. Marcus answered on the second ring when I called. "That email you sent," he said after a pause. "It lines up with my records." "What about the date?" I asked. "The hospital admission." Marcus exhaled once. "That's a problem for him, not for you." The reassurance wasn't comforting. It just confirmed the size of the gap I was standing in. The next move happened before I thought it through. The records office was downtown, a short walk from the courthouse. The building looked like it existed to slow people down. A line formed naturally, no signage required. At the counter, the clerk slid a clipboard across without looking up. "Fill this out," she said. The form title ran longer than the clipboard. Request for deceased party records, expedited, non-refundable. The word expedited sat underlined. The word non-refundable sat in bold. "Processing time?" I asked. She shrugged. "Depends who asked for it last." The answer felt practiced. After submitting the form and paying the fee, a receipt printed with a cheerful tone. "Thank you for your request." It didn't specify who the thank you was for. My phone rang again before I reached the exit. "Last chance," Robert said. "This doesn't have to get messy." "I'm already here," I replied. "So is the paper trail." Silence stretched long enough to register. "Be careful," he said finally. "You don't know what you're stepping into." The call ended without goodbye. An email notification came through as I stood by the elevators. The subject line was generic: Record Status Update. The message body was shorter than expected. "Your requested file is currently on hold pending third-party review." No explanation, no timeline, just a status change. I walked back to the counter and asked the clerk what third-party review meant. She checked the screen, then glanced at me. "Someone with standing requested a pause," she said. "Until that's resolved, we can't release anything." "Who?" I asked. She shook her head. "Can't disclose that." Another practiced answer. Outside, my phone buzzed again, a text from my brother this time. "Dad says you went to the records office. That wasn't necessary." The message didn't ask a question. It assumed compliance. A new email stacked beneath the status update. Same sender, same neutral font. "Please note, hold requests may delay fulfillment indefinitely." Indefinitely wasn't a word I liked seeing attached to anything legal. The bank alert came in before sunrise. A generic subject line, no warning tone, just a notification stating that activity on a shared account had been temporarily restricted pending review. The account listed wasn't one I used anymore, but the name was familiar. It had covered my grandfather's medical bills during his last year. A follow-up email arrived minutes later. Outstanding balance flagged for investigation. The amount wasn't large. The implication was. At work, the day unraveled quickly. An internal message from compliance asked me to step into a small conference room before my first meeting. 2 people were already there, laptops open, expressions neutral. "This is routine," one of them said. "We need to ask about a potential conflict." The words landed carefully, chosen to sound procedural instead of accusatory. Documents were referenced, dates matched the flagged account. My name appeared in the system as a former authorized contact. "We're reviewing," she continued. "You don't need to do anything yet." Yet stayed implied. Robert called while I was still at my desk. "The account had to be secured," he said. "You left things exposed." "That account paid hospital bills," I replied. "You didn't have authority to touch it." He ignored that. "You're causing complications," Robert said. "I'm fixing them." By noon, a courier delivered another envelope. This one came from a legal office that did exist. The filing asserted that I had no financial involvement in my grandfather's estate and requested formal recognition of that claim. It wasn't a threat. It was a move. Marcus met me later at the same place near the courthouse. The folder between us had grown thicker. He filed fast, Marcus said, and deliberately. "So the hold," I said. "That was him." Marcus nodded. "Emergency request," he said. "Full name, date of birth, hospital record attached. Whoever submitted it knew exactly what to include." The details stung more than the filing. The trust wasn't stalled by chance. It had been paused by precision. "There's nothing I can do to stop this part," Marcus added, "but you should understand the pattern." He laid the papers side by side, aligning dates without comment. Every action Robert took landed just ahead of mine. Each time I moved, something closed. "He's not reacting," Marcus said. "He's routing around you." The realization didn't arrive as a thought. It arrived as a list of closed doors. Back home, an email from work waited with the subject line, "Updated. Compliance review in progress." The language stayed calm. The effect did not. My brother texted an hour later. "Dad says this would all go away if you signed." No question, no concern, just information. The bank sent another notice. The medical provider followed with a billing update referencing the same flagged account. Systems spoke to each other faster than people ever had. Robert called again. "This is getting serious," he said. "I don't want to see you hurt over pride." "I didn't do this," I replied. "You let it happen," he said, by refusing to cooperate. The call ended with the same efficiency as the others. The laptop stayed open long after the screen dimmed. Documents filled the desktop, each one accurate, each one insufficient. Every new file confirmed what was already clear. Collecting paper wasn't enough. Another internal notification stacked onto the earlier one. No accusations, just reminders. Processes continuing without pause. The draft email to my family sat unsent. The subject line asked a question I already knew wouldn't be answered honestly. The body tried to explain things no one wanted explained. The cursor blinked. Marcus texted once. "Stop responding, start planning." The draft disappeared with a single keystroke. The laptop closed. A legal pad came out instead, blank except for the date at the top. Family group chats went silent in a way that felt deliberate, not awkward. No one checked in, no one followed up. The absence itself became the message. The bank stopped sending reminders once the account was locked. That was somehow worse. At the office, conversations shifted. People still spoke to me, just not about anything that mattered. My calendar stayed full, but nothing moved forward. Everything hovered. That was the bottom. Not dramatic, just stalled. The legal pad from the night before was still on the table. A few lines sat on it, uneven, written without much structure. They weren't excuses, they weren't feelings, just statements. Not pushing back because it looked greedy. Assuming silence meant maturity. Letting vague comments pass as reassurance. My grandfather had said it more than once. "It's handled. Paperwork's done. You won't have to deal with it." Those lines had sounded like relief at the time. I treated them like conclusions instead of prompts. Every time he offered to explain, the subject changed. I let it. Robert never filled that gap. He didn't need to. I assumed he would respect boundaries that were never enforced. The phone rang once that morning. It was my brother. The call went unanswered. A text followed. "Dad says you're taking this too far." The wording stayed consistent. Too far. Too emotional. Too stubborn. Never incorrect. Marcus showed up in the afternoon with a folder thinner than the rest. He didn't say much at first. He slid a single page across the table. "Old trust file," he said. "Never activated." The document listed a reference number I hadn't seen before. It didn't look official. No letterhead, no seal, just identifiers and notes. "There's more," Marcus added, pulling out a second sheet. "This was handwritten by your grandfather." A name sat in the margin, not Robert's. "That's the secondary contact," Marcus said. "Someone he trusted to step in if things stalled." "Why didn't this come up before?" I asked. "Because no one asked for it," Marcus replied, "and because you didn't push." That landed without accusation, just a fact. The cost clarified itself in that moment. Activating the trust wouldn't just reopen paperwork, it would redraw lines. Robert wouldn't interpret it as process. He'd see it as defiance. "There's no halfway option here," Marcus said. "Once this moves, he'll respond." "I know," I said. "What you lose isn't just leverage," Marcus continued. "It's access. Family access." The list on the pad grew longer. Not asking follow-up questions. Confusing calm with safety. Letting someone else define reasonable. The realization didn't come with anger. It came with a sense of order. Things fit once the assumptions were removed. Marcus left after handing over the final form. The request itself was straightforward. Names, dates, reference number, signature. It didn't ask for justification, just confirmation. The email from work sat unread. The family thread stayed still. Robert didn't call. The cursor hovered over the submit button longer than expected. Not because of doubt, because of acknowledgement. Once sent, the request couldn't be reframed as a misunderstanding. It would be logged, time-stamped, and routed through channels Robert couldn't control directly. The house phone rang as the form finalized. I didn't answer. The confirmation page loaded with a simple notice. Request received, processing initiated. No emotion, no warning. Another notification followed, this one from a legal office confirming receipt. Standard language, standard disclaimers. The legal pad closed with the pen still inside. The list wasn't finished, but it didn't need to be. The direction was set. The phone buzzed again, a voicemail alert from Robert. The transcript preview cut off after the first line. This doesn't have to turn into, the message stayed unopened. The response arrived faster than expected, not from the records office, but from Robert's attorney. The email was addressed to Marcus and copied to me, formal and precise. It asserted that the trust referenced in my request had lapsed years ago and no longer carried legal weight. Attached was a declaration signed by Robert. It didn't mention favoritism. It didn't mention family. It framed everything as compliance. According to the filing, the trust had been rendered inactive due to administrative incompletion and replaced by a valid, executed will. The language was clean, confident, written by someone who'd done this before. Marcus called within minutes. He's not defending the will, he said. He's burying the trust. The distinction mattered. The will was just the surface. The trust was the structure underneath it. Another document followed an hour later, a sworn statement from a family friend, someone who'd known my grandfather for years. The statement claimed my grandfather had changed his mind late in life, that he'd wanted Robert to manage everything directly. The handwriting wasn't my grandfather's. The phrasing wasn't his either. Still, the signature at the bottom matched the name everyone recognized. That witness was reachable, Marcus said when we reviewed it. Robert didn't find him last week. The implication landed quietly. This wasn't a reaction to my request. It was a response planned long before it. The email I'd found from my grandfather to Marcus was submitted next. Robert's attorney dismissed it in a single paragraph, calling it informal correspondence lacking legal force. No denial, just minimization. Intent isn't execution, the response read. At work, the review escalated. A new meeting appeared on my calendar, this one including legal. The phrasing stayed neutral, but the timing didn't. The flagged account, the trust inquiry, the legal filings, everything now sat in the same bucket labeled risk. Robert didn't call. He didn't need to. The filing spoke for him. Marcus laid the timeline out on the table during our next meeting. Dates, delays, gaps that lined up too neatly. He never wanted the trust activated, Marcus said, because once it was, he'd be accountable. Accountable didn't just mean money. It meant disclosures, oversight, questions about how assets had been used during the years my grandfather was declining. The trust wasn't a gift. It was a guardrail. The 72-hour deadline made sense now. It wasn't pressure for agreement. It was a lock. If I signed away rights before the trust surfaced, Robert's exposure stayed contained. The non-existent law office fit the same pattern, a buffer, something that looked official enough to pass initial scrutiny without connecting back to anything real. He's been routing around this for years, Marcus said. You just crossed into the part he protects. The next filing landed late afternoon. Robert's attorney formally requested recognition of the will as the sole governing document, citing lack of enforceable alternatives. The motion moved fast, too fast for coincidence. Marcus read it twice, then once more. For now, he said, this puts him ahead. The words weren't dramatic, they were procedural. My phone buzzed with a voicemail alert, Robert this time. The transcript preview showed only the first line. This isn't what your grandfather wanted. I didn't open it. The records office followed up with an update of their own. The trust file remained on hold, now flagged for extended review due to competing claims. No timeline provided. Competing claims meant leverage. It meant delay favored the person who could afford it. Marcus closed the folder. "You're not losing," he said, "but you're not winning this round." The message from work came through as we stood to leave. The review would continue pending resolution of external matters. No accusation, no reassurance. Outside, another notification arrived. Robert's attorney had filed a supplemental brief. The subject line referenced my grandfather's will again, framing it as the central issue. The will had never been the point. It was the distraction. The real fight was about who controlled the narrative of the past few years, who answered for decisions made when my grandfather couldn't. Marcus paused before getting into his car. "He's betting you'll back off," he said. "Most people do when it gets this technical." The word technical didn't match the weight of what was happening, but it was accurate. Systems favored familiarity, not fairness. Another email stacked into the thread, this one from the court clerk confirming receipt of Robert's filing. Neutral language, automatic timestamp. For the first time since this started, the path forward narrowed instead of branching. The trust might not be recognized. The will might stand. Robert had positioned himself exactly where he wanted to be. The phone buzzed again, a new voicemail, this one from my brother. "Dad says this is your last chance to stop this." The message cut off there. Marcus watched as I slid the phone back into my bag. "We keep going," he said, "just differently." The notice for the formal review came through as a calendar invite, plain and unavoidable. Location, time, list of attendees, attorneys, heirs, a representative from the state. No room for side conversations, no room to posture. Robert arrived early. My brother sat beside him, hands folded, posture rehearsed. Their attorney organized papers with practiced calm. Marcus and I took seats across the table without greeting anyone. The lead attorney opened the session by outlining the purpose: review of competing claims, verification of documents, determination of validity. No mention of motives, just process. That was the point. When it was my turn, I didn't speak first. Marcus handed over the folder. "Exhibit A," he said, "original trust reference file." The number on the page matched the one from my grandfather's handwritten notes. The state representative confirmed it existed in the system prior to the will Robert presented. Robert leaned forward. "That trust was never activated," he said. "It doesn't apply." The objection came quickly, confident. His attorney nodded along. Marcus didn't respond. He slid the next document forward. "Exhibit B," he said. "Call log and audio record." The room shifted slightly. Not tension, attention. The recording played without introduction. Robert's voice filled the space, unmistakable. "Yes," the voice said. "I need that file placed on hold." "Yes, immediately." "No, she doesn't need to be notified." The clerk's voice followed, confirming the request using my grandfather's full name and date of birth. The call ended with Robert thanking her for moving quickly. Robert's attorney stood halfway out of his chair. "That recording," the lead attorney raised a hand. "Will address admissibility," she said. "Please sit." No one argued after that. Marcus spoke again. "The trust wasn't inactive by neglect," he said. "It was obstructed." Robert stayed silent. His earlier confidence didn't translate well in the absence of interruption. The state representative typed steadily. Keys clicked at an even pace. A notification chimed softly from the system terminal near the wall. The screen refreshed on its own. Previous allocation marked invalid. The phrasing wasn't meant to be ironic. It still managed to be. Robert's attorney whispered something. Robert shook his head once. My brother finally looked over. "What does that mean?" he asked. The lead attorney answered without looking at him. "It means the attempted distribution has no standing," she said, "pending further review." Marcus didn't press. He didn't need to. Robert cleared his throat. "This is being mischaracterized," he said. "I was protecting the estate." The response came from the other side of the table. You intervened, the state representative said, without authority. Another notification appeared, a procedural flag, a timeline update. The lead attorney continued. The trust file will be released, she said. An investigation into interference will follow. Robert opened his mouth again. Nothing came out. My brother pushed his chair back slightly, then stopped, as if unsure whether leaving was allowed. This isn't about family, the lead attorney added. It's about compliance. That word again. Neutral. Heavy. The meeting moved into logistics, next steps, required disclosures, potential consequences. Robert's name appeared repeatedly in the notes. Mine did not. A clerk printed a summary and slid it across the table. The header listed the trust as active, the will as secondary. Robert didn't touch it. Marcus gathered our copies without comment. As we stood, the system chimed once more. Another automatic update populated the shared screen, time-stamped and final. Invalid distribution recorded. Review initiated. No one smiled. No one needed to. Robert remained seated as the room emptied. His attorney spoke quietly, urgency replacing confidence. My brother hesitated, then followed. Marcus waited until we reached the hallway. That's the shift, he said. They can't put it back now. Behind us, voices lowered, then sharpened. Doors closed, paper moved faster. Another notification buzzed on my phone. A formal acknowledgement from the court confirming activation of the trust and suspension of all prior allocations. The message ended with a single line. Further action pending. Marcus watched as I read it. You did exactly what you needed to, he said. Down the hall, Robert's voice rose briefly, then cut off mid-sentence. A door closed harder than necessary. The system didn't react. It didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been put on the table, and nothing there belonged to him anymore. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, each one documented, time-stamped, and forwarded to the right people. Robert was asked to submit explanations, then clarifications, then supporting records he didn't have. Family members started hearing about it before he could control the framing. Questions replaced assumptions. At the next extended family gathering, no one asked me to sign anything. Conversations stalled when Robert entered the room. Someone mentioned audits in a low voice. Someone else asked whether the trust had always existed. Robert answered carefully, slower than usual, like each word carried weight now. My brother stopped calling. A short email arrived from his attorney confirming that the portion of the estate he'd signed for had been voided. No apology, no argument, just acknowledgement. The distribution followed the trust exactly. No negotiations, no favors. Funds transferred according to instructions written years earlier. The paperwork arrived in a plain envelope, thicker than expected. The cover letter listed account numbers and dates. It didn't mention fairness or family. An email notification followed minutes later. Trust activated successfully. The subject line felt oddly upbeat for something so final. Robert asked to meet once, not at the house, at a coffee shop halfway between neighborhoods. He arrived early, hands folded, posture controlled. No folder this time. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. I know, I replied. The statement didn't invite discussion. You could have come to me, Robert continued. We didn't have to involve everyone. This was the only way, I said. I'm not sharing decisions anymore. He nodded once, like he was taking notes. The conversation ended without escalation. No raised voices, no reconciliation. At work, the review closed. A short message from compliance confirmed no further action was needed. The flagged account was cleared. The system moved on. Marcus sent a brief text later that day. Case closed on our end. The keys to the family house sat on the counter that night. I placed them in an envelope without ceremony. The address was familiar. My handwriting wasn't rushed. Dropping it in the mailbox felt procedural, not symbolic. Back at my apartment, the door shut behind me with the same sound it always made. The locks turned smoothly. Nothing resisted. Another notification came through as I set my bag down. The estate file had been updated. Status changed to closed. The screen dimmed on its own a moment later.